before I start then, apart from if I haven't already discredited myself with that lack of proficiency in IT, I'm going to add a disclaimer to my presentation before I start. And that is, I certainly don't profess to have magic wands, and I wouldn't even suggest that some of what we're doing is innovative practice or even best practice. I know that we are all doing the same things. And I think what I hope I present to you is literally my interpretation of Voices from the Field, which is a very honest view of our school and our context, which does expose us, which does make us vulnerable to criticisms and feedback from yourselves. But I just wanted to be honest with all of you and just, I suppose, empathize with just how difficult a struggle this is, not just post-pandemic, but in the challenging times that we're all facing. So the next slide then provides a little context to my school. If you don't already know where it is, it's Maesteg School, which is in the Llinvi Valley, right at the top end of Bridgend Borough, and the last bastion of Bridgend, really, before you drop down into Neath Port Talbot. And as you can see, it's around about 1,100 pupils. We vary between 1,100 and 1,200 every 2 to 3 years. And my FSM profile now is 37.8%. We have over half of our pupils who live in the 10% of the most deprived areas of Wales, with a significant number, my biggest catchment area, actually living in the top 5% of the most deprived areas of Wales. And something that is absolutely relevant to our attendance context then is in 2018-2019 academic year, we had 8 buses provided via home to school transport, and that was removed for the first time in 2020. So the current picture is we have 1 bus that comes from outside of the catchment area from Neath Port Talbot, transporting pupils into our school. And that's relevant, and I wanted to share that with you because, as I'm about to show you, that context, that picture of deprivation, that barrier to education is having a significant, or has had a significant impact on our attendance. So if you check the next slide, please, Charlotte. And this slide shows 2 graphs, and it doesn't take a genius to work this out. And I know it's something, it's a truism, we already know it. But the left chart shows the significant increase in poverty and free school meals data in my school. And the right chart shows the significant decline in attendance. And it's not just the pandemic that has impacted on that. There's a clear correlation, as we all know, between poverty and attendance, and removing barriers is key to removing barriers, to improving attendance and improving education outcomes. Now, what I'm proud of is that we contributed to the thematic review that Estyn conducted. I put a hyperlink there on the slide for you. Charlotte, if you just click on that hyperlink, I mean, I'm hoping then that it's easy access for all of you, but if you click on the hyperlink, what you'll see, or it should bring you straight to it, is the recommendations that Estyn make. And they've organised those recommendations into 3 areas: what schools can do, what local authorities can do, and what Welsh Government can do. And it's even that recognition that we are not doing this, we can't do this in isolation, we can't do this alone. Now, the community-focused school approach is absolutely essential, and I think this is something that is going to be the focus of today's attendance meeting. And I think it's things like the excellent partnership work with early help in our area, Education Welfare Service, Children's Services, community police officers, youth workers, etc., that has created, or certainly attributed with many of the improvements that we've recently made. And Professor Alma Harris flips that phrase, doesn't she, from community-focused schools to school-focused communities. And I think if you can achieve that within your community, then you are halfway to making significant improvements to things like attendance. If we can move on, Charlotte, to the next slide. I don't know if the hyperlink has worked, but it is on there when the slides are distributed later. Now, what I'm going to share with you is our attendance, and there's a typo in there, it actually says 2024. So it was our attendance at the current picture then of last year's attendance, okay? And you can see the significant gap and deterioration over the last 2 years, so from 2021 to 2023, and then the improvements we made last year. Now, those of you who are responsible for whole school attendance will recognise that a 2.1% gain in attendance is massive. Normally, to make improvements, we're looking at about half a percentage point in terms of improvements in attendance. So to make that leap last year was something we were quite proud of. However, we're still 6 percentage points below the Welsh average for attendance last year. The family of school average was 9.8, which was also well below the national average of 10.4 in terms of the gap between FSM and non-FSM. Although there's been a drop in our gap this year, that FSM gap, closing that poverty gap in relation to attendance figures with FSM pupils, continues to be a challenge. Now, I'm deliberately exposing our data because despite our best efforts, it still isn't good enough. And you can see, just for context, I've put in and included the 2018-2019 data, where you can see the EFSM, non-FSM gap in attendance is only just over 3%. So I just wanted to provide a context there when I talk. Free school meals, Marco, thank you. Schools again. But it's an indication of poverty. And I think for those of you who are not in school setting, FSM is free school meals. And I think what I'm here to say is, although I can prove that the removal of free school transport has had a significant detrimental impact on whole school attendance, quite frankly, it begins to sound like an excuse. And there is nothing I can do to change that. So it has to be a mantra we adopted last year was no excuses and tough love. And if you move on to the next slide, please, Charlotte. When we talk about belonging, perthyn, I think for us, it was about how can we improve what we do to make children want to come to school. And in the academic year of the last academic year, 23-24, when we were looking at not relying on free school transport as a context to provide excuses for poor attendance, I happened to be, in my role as a peer inspector, I carried out an inspection in Pontydilais school in Swansea Valley. And if you just, again, I won't ask Charlotte to click the hyperlinks, but I put the hyperlinks in there for the best practice case studies because they really make good reading. I always used to read them and feel frustrated because we're doing all the same things. There isn't anybody who is responsible for whole school attendance, I think, that is having any great magical spell that's going to make everything better. But it is about teamwork. It is about working with others and partnership work to really understand the reasons behind pupils not wanting to come to school or having that poor attitude to attendance. And I think there are three things that I would attribute our very small incremental drift or improvements in attendance last year that I would attribute the successes to. And the first thing was it was very much inclusion. The number of children who were disengaging from MySTIG certainly was because they didn't feel that they were successful in our existing provision. So we created alternative provisions within our school, one called MySTIG Alternative Curriculum, or MAC, where pupils with the EBSD needs receive quite intensive support for managing emotions. NODFA, which is working in our youth club, which is based in Cairo, for children who absolutely had something, it had to be below 30% attendance. Every one of those children, there are 13 enrolled there, has now achieved 75% attendance. That's the lowest attending pupil to 97% attendance in this half term. And then really importantly, knowing every single child so that every child feels valued. And it's providing the data on those children. It's having very detailed pastoral logs so that we know when somebody's going through a challenging time and experience, and really investing in our form tutor periods so that every child has a champion and a sort of local parentis where they feel they've got somebody on their side in the role of form tutor. And we allocated 30 minutes in the morning session of form tutor time to establishing that ethos and culture when they come into school. And then the second thing, curriculum, creating that accessibility of courses. You can see we've introduced the Prince's Trust there. We were very successful in introducing that and won the national award, but it really is a very valuable alternative provision or course for children who probably will leave with no formal qualifications. And it was investing in a lot of alternatives to heavy exam courses, because we felt that children, or we knew that children were disengaging from certain lessons, so that when you analyse the attendance of pupils in school, it wasn't just their attendance on a daily basis that we were interested in, it was attendance on certain days and certain lessons that became a point of discussion as well. And then involving parental engagement, where we've employed an additional family engagement officer. We currently have 2 who are responsible for first day phone calls and home visits, supporting the work of EWS. And they held those meetings off-site at Cairo Development Trust, which is an area in our most challenged catchment area, to allow, because it's not just the children who don't have transport to school, it is the parents as well. You know, if we exclude pupils, we've often got to pay for a taxi to get them home because parents cannot or do not have access to transport. So I think that's something that we've really learned from. And as I said, again, I really want to recognise the best practice case studies from Estin, because seeing another school in action, adopting some of these strategies with some of the best CPD and professional learning that I could hope for. And I think that's something that I would stress in my presentation today, is continuing to learn from others. So again, I'm just going to share with you where we are now. And since September, the most significant gaps, we're still 3.5 percentage points below the Welsh average. This was just before half term. It is better than the 6 percentage points from last summer, but it's still early days, and we're still worried that this will widen throughout the year as we have greater in-school holiday requests. We've got the exam seasons coming up. We've got Christmas to get through. And if you live in our area, we've got a festival that happens in Margam Park, just on the day of an English language exam as well, the In It Together festival that decimates whole school attendance on a Thursday and Friday in the lead up to that festival. And I'm not being flippant, we'll all have things like that will impact on whole school attendance, and it's about being prepared for those events and trying to align those with 100% attendance days and things like that. So since September, the most significant gaps in attendance are in Year 11, where we are above the national average by 2.6 percentage points. We've got a fantastic Year 11. You can see the difference in the cohorts there. I've been very, very honest. You can look at this and be as worried as I am about our Year 7 attendance, where we're 3 percentage points below the national average. We've got a significant issue with one particular catchment area, and I would say a lot of the absence codes in Year 7 are attributable to poor behaviour and exclusions. And I think, again, I come back to that point, that behaviour and attendance are not school issues. They are societal issues. 80% of a child's life is spent outside of school. So if we are trying to just fix these problems by working in isolation, which is something that we've been talking about, Tegwyn raised this morning in her opening, then we are not going to make, or we're not going to see the impact that we hope to have. It has to be working in partnership with others, because we are not solely responsible for this. It is all about society's attitudes and trying to change those attitudes and working with the parents in particular. And the next slide. So just as we learned from other schools to create that sense of belonging and to really consolidate what we had done, we continue to work in collaboration to tackle that really stubborn problem of persistent absenteeism. Now that definition falls to those attending whose attendance is below 90%, we've got over a third of pupils who have attendance below 90% in Year 7 to 11. The code most used in each year group is the I code, which we know is condoned absence and illness. And Friday is our worst attending day. Now, for me, all of the things that we've done to create that sense of belonging, we're not hitting those stubborn non-attenders. So very quickly, we realised that we needed to do something radical. Now, there's an organisation called South Wales Partnership. I'm a member of that. It's made up of 35 schools, all of a similar context, facing the same challenges. And within that partnership, a group of 6 schools had set up their online virtual school, because they recognised, as do I, that attendance is a safeguarding issue. A child who is not in school is not, and adults or school staff don't have eyes on them, is a safeguarding concern. So part of what we were looking at is how to work with those parents who are crying out for support and help in trying to, or in getting their children to engage in school. Now, what we saw in that school, in the South Wales Partnership with that school, is the significant improvement in attendance of those pupils who've been just diagnosed by a medical professional as having anxiety. And that's one of the criteria to access the virtual school. And we haven't set ours up yet. We will be doing that this half term. We are in the process of meeting with parents now to try and engage our pupils in that online platform. They cannot be enrolled unless they meet the strict criteria that we've just decided. And for us, it's going to be about measuring the impact, but that's had significant impact elsewhere. I think the other thing that we've done is continuing to create that belonging at whole school level to ensure that every child is seen, because you cannot thrive unless you are seen and have those trusting relationships. So again, as I've said, no magic wand, no clever answers, trying to do, certainly with Perth in our virtual platform, trying to be creative and innovative to tackle the problem. The reality of it is that if those children don't engage in that platform, they are very likely to opt for elective home education, which then is a significant loss to an impact on school budgets, as well as the fact that we know that those children will not go on to do formal qualifications and probably won't have access to the quality education they would have if we control some of that element. So there are ongoing challenges that we're constantly seeking to overcome. It requires relentless optimism and resilience. I'm aware that you are all doing the same things. So thank you for humouring me. I know it's a whistle-stop snapshot of where we are, and I hope you found the honesty of my presentation reassuring. I don't come here saying, look what we've done, aren't we fabulous? I'm coming here saying, even though we're doing all of these things, we are still well below national average, well below where we were pre-pandemic, which is what Estyn will say, and still struggling with those barriers that are not of our doing. But thank you very much for giving me your attention. So I'm going to swiftly move on to introduce my colleague Andrew Bond, who is from Bridgend College, who I'm sure will enlighten us as to the strategies that they're deploying.
Thank you, Helen. I'm going to talk today about the workload review and some of the things that have come out of that. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and we'll go from there. Hopefully share my screen. Okay, I hope everyone can see it. So in terms of further education, post-pandemic, like all education establishments, we had a huge issue around attendance of learners, the well-being of learners, and ultimately the impact that also had on tutors and the amount in terms of their workload and how that was impacting. So one of the things that came out of this was a commissioned report by Coleg Cymru, who are the commission that look after basically further education in Wales. And one of the things that they asked colleges in Wales to do was to look at different areas that they would consider pinch points within the further education establishments. Pinch points that either increased tutor workload or pinch points that, for whatever reason, meant that we were not supporting the learners as appropriately as we could have. So on the screen, you can see in front of you, these were some of the themes that initially came out from some of the colleges that took part in this survey across Wales. So at Bridgend, you can see that one of the major issues that we had were that learners weren't attending for several weeks. then they would suddenly return and there would be added additional workload or pressure on the course tutor of that learner to kind of get them up to speed. One of the other issues we had was around skills classes and people not attending skills classes. But you can see there that although that's unique in Bridgend, there are those themes that are quite prevalent throughout all of the colleges in Wales. So from that point then, we were asked to pilot several kind of initiatives across the colleges to see if we could kind of target some of these key themes in some of these key areas. So as Helen said, there isn't necessarily a kind of a magic wand that we can wave that makes everything okay. And I think in terms of what we did in Bridgend and what people did in other colleges, it was really about taking elements of what we can do and making it better. So to start off with this, one of the things that we did is we looked at, we conducted a baseline insight survey. And that was our opportunity as a college to look at our attendance management policies and procedures, to look at our data systems, our MIS, and to really have a think about, actually, are they working for us? Are they doing what we need them to do? Or are they just a hindrance? Because I think we all love data, we all love to track and to, you know, that's the best way of kind of keeping on top of things like attendance, retention. But actually, how many times do we look at that data and it actually doesn't mean anything? It's meaningless in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So it gave us a really good opportunity to strip everything back and ask those key questions around, actually, is this data or are these dashboards, are they supporting us in what we want to achieve? Once we did that, then we had a focus group, one per college, and we looked at our college specifically, and we identified areas for improvement. So for us, it was around freeing up personal tutors to do what they do best, which is teach. And also, it was about giving learners the opportunity and support that maybe our tutors couldn't give, because they may have a huge well-being issue to deal with, but in 2 minutes' time, they're due to be in a classroom. And again, it was about making sure that we do the right thing for both our tutors and our learners. The other thing that we were going to look at then is, again, all around skills attendance. So when I talk about skills attendance in this context, I'm talking about things like GCSE. So those were two of the kind of focus areas that we looked at. After that, then we did a quick desktop review. And again, we looked at, again, our specific systems, and we thought, okay, how can we improve them, or what can we use to kind of tweak different elements? So in terms of Bridgend, the two kind of areas that we wanted to work on and the two types of pilots that we thought we'd focus on were around looking and creating roles called personal development and progression coaches. A personal development and progression coach essentially were three roles that took over from the personal tutors in these curriculum areas. So the curriculum areas that we started to focus on were services to people. So that's our hospitality section. So we got hair and beauty, we've got travel and tourism. Our step-up courses are for learners who come into the college at level 1, and they tend to have a lot lower ability, but also naturally have higher levels of wellbeing support needed, and our construction learners. And the reason that we focused on using personal development and progression coaches for these levels was actually the success data for these curriculum areas had been consistently low for a period of time. So one of the reasons why we chose to use personal development coaches in these areas is we wanted to free up our tutors so that they could spend more time doing what they do, which is obviously teaching the subject. But we also wanted somebody dedicated in those areas that could take time with learners to go through any wellbeing concerns, to go through all of the pastoral kind of care, which you guys know will just take up so much time, but is so important. So these were the three areas that we thought we'd look at. The second thing that we looked at was automated text messages for people who are attending GCSEs. So in terms of GCSEs runs maybe a little bit different to some schools. So in a college, you could have anywhere from 200 to 2,000 learners sitting at GCSE in English or maths in one academic year, okay? One of the huge challenges around that, particularly for those GCSE tutors, is keeping on top of attendance, because a GCSE tutor in a college, for instance, might have a GCSE session at 9 till 10 o'clock in the morning with a group of 20. They'll have another class then, separate class at 10 to 11, another 20, and so on, so throughout the day. So in terms of the numbers that FE tutors have around GCSE, they could have up to 200 learners individually a week. And again, that ability to keep on top of attendance and challenge non-attendance, it was a big thing. So we thought we'd focus on an idea, sending out automated text messages to learners who didn't attend. So impacts and outcomes of both of these things. So if we start off with the GCSE text messages. So the purpose behind this was that if a learner was absent in a GCSE class, as soon as it's marked as a U, at the end of that day, they will be sent an automated text message to say that you've missed your GCSE class. Can you please contact your tutor to let them know the reason why? And in the first year and the second year, that address given to the learner who was text was actually my address. I'm the manager of skills. And the reason I asked for that to be sent to me initially in the first instance, it was an opportunity for me to capture reasons why people weren't attending as well. And it gave me, as a manager, a much richer understanding of why people weren't attending and the reasons behind it. But if you could look here, this is kind of how we kind of did things. So in October of the first year, we sent 350 messages, November 648, December 310. So in the total of this initial pilot, we sent 2,441 text messages. You can see there that the in terms of like the response and the improvement, it is mixed. But where it did impact was it tended to impact much higher with learners who were coming from more challenging backgrounds. It also meant that quite often it was parents who were contacting me to say, oh, why has, I don't know, Andrew had a text message? And it gave me a lot of rich conversations with parents as well. Now, although this was only initially used for the pilot between October and March of 22 to 23, we've continued it on as a college. And it's a huge tool in terms of, again, getting that data, getting that rich insight into what our learners are doing and why they're not attending skills. Because again, if you've got up to 2,000 learners who are sitting at GCSE, it's a key thing, particularly with a one-year reset, that if they aren't attending, we need to identify very early on. As a skills department, we can have conversations with those learners. We can have conversations with other curriculum managers around why this person isn't attending. And statistically, the more you attend a GCSE resit class, the more likely you are to be successful. And particularly in further education, the importance of a learner getting a C or C in English or maths is key into them progressing onto a level 3 course within the college as well. So we put a lot of emphasis on this. So this is something that we've continued to do. And again, we've continued to see a genuine kind of improvement in attendance alongside this. The other area that we focused on was the personal development and progression coach information. So in front of you here, these are the 3 areas that we focused on for the pilot. They are construction, services to people, and step up. So construction, when we initially, the year that we initially looked at running this pilot, had a success rate of around about 78%. In 22 to 23, with the impact of the progression development coach, that success jumped up to 84%. Now, part of the reason for that is that personal development coach can take time that a course tutor wouldn't necessarily have to speak to learners, to get to know them, to identify the issues that maybe they've got to attending college. And for an area like construction, that was a huge impact in their successful completion. Services to people, again, an area that had suffered similar low attendance and low success, had in the first year, before we started, it was at 81%. In the second year, then after using it for a year, it jumped up to 83%. Step up in the last one, then, for instance, started off with 87%. It actually dipped off in the second year of using it to 83, but in the last year, it's had a huge jump to 94%. So in terms of the reason why it dropped off in the second, we had issues with some staff sickness. But in terms of the personal development progression coach as a pilot and as something that we're going to continue with in the college, you can see over the 3-year trends, the improvement of success in those areas, it's undeniable. And if, again, you look at the attendance, the retention rates, it's all to do with those personal development coaches having those personal conversations with learners, being able to spend time that a personal tutor hasn't always got the opportunity to do. So this has been a real success in these areas. This year, we've also looked at using a personal development and progression coach in an area that is a high success area. So these 3 that you see on the screen, these were areas that, for whatever reason, were low in their success rate. This year, we're piloting using it actually in an area that already has a high success, but it is, again, it's about making sure that those areas are able to push on that little bit more. So this year, we're also looking to use it in our kind of creative and performing arts area, which usually comes in at around a success of 92, 93. So again, we may only be talking 1 or 2%, but we're looking to see if the impact of this is positive and is able to push it up into that next level. What's really interesting, and some of the concerns that we had around, particularly about the PDPCs, the personal development progression coaches, is that we were concerned that if we were to take out course tutors that we've used historically, that we would lose something, that we would lose that personal touch, that kind of relationship that is often built up. But quite the opposite happened. We found out very quickly that it was a very positive experience for the learners and actually the personal development coaches, because their role was solely to look after the pastoral and kind of holistic support of our learners within those curriculum areas. They got to know the learners more specifically. They got to know about their kind of their concerns, their kind of their strengths, their weaknesses. And you can see on the screen now, these are some of the comments around the PDBCs that learners have kind of testimonied. So it says, my personal tutor is amazing and she's encouraged me to complete this course. Without her, I would have dropped out ages ago. Our personal tutor is amazing and does all she can to help and support us. She goes above and beyond. And my personal tutor is an absolute gem and has helped me massively throughout the year. Without her, I probably would have left. And the 3 areas that we targeted, and that the 3 areas that these testimonies have come from, are the areas that we would get high dropout. Because in Step Up, you've got learners, as I said, who are coming with lots of needs, not just kind of learning needs, but kind of well-being needs outside of college. And what we found very, very evidently is that the personal development progression coaches does have a positive impact in terms of being able to support them, being able to take time to have those one-to-one conversations and help them navigate them through the year. So this year, we're continuing with the PDBCs and we're continuing with the GCSE text messages, because again, we are as a college seeing an impact. And next year, we've got plans of potentially rolling out more of the personal development and progression coaches, because again, with data like this, that is so positive in terms of a 3-year trend, we would be naive not to kind of push it out and see how it works. But also what's I suppose the key thing in terms of why we started these two kind of projects is for people who were personal tutors, they've seen their workload drop, but it hasn't impacted on learner attendance. It hasn't impacted on learner success. In terms of GCSE text messages, it's taken, again, in terms of the workload of skills tutors, it's taken an awful lot of kind of time and work off them because it's an automated process. So in terms of our pilot projects and the reason that we started them, both initiatives, although small in some instances, has had a positive impact. And that's why as a college, we continue to use them. Thank you.
Hi, morning everyone, it's us. So hi everyone, I'm Paul Warren. I'm the lead for school improvement for Caerphilly Local Authority.
Hi, I'm Jamie Duggan, School Improvement Officer with Caerphilly Local Authority.
And we're going to talk to you about our approach to improving attendance. We feel a bit lazy actually because someone's going to do a slides for us. So apologies, Charlotte. Thanks for doing them for us. So in terms of our approach, I think the first thing is, I'm just reflecting and echoing what everyone has said already. It's really difficult, isn't it? It's very challenging attendance, but it is important to celebrate where we are getting the wins in terms of, we are seeing improvements. And as an authority, we are seeing improvement in attendance and we are tracking and monitoring and being realistic about where we are, but we are celebrating kind of the gains we are making. I think there is sometimes when it's as challenging as getting all these pupils back into school to pre-pandemic levels, sometimes there's a tendency to panic. So we've been really careful to think about our approach and our collective vision to attendance, and then that makes the decisions that we make so much easier. And we're going to talk very much today around kind of our self-evaluation and how we really scrutinize what we do as a local authority and our expectation to schools and other settings that in terms of their approach to attendance as well. So our approach is very much based on honesty, it's evaluation, it's about having huge buckets of resilience, and it is also about having this kind of shared mission. And I am so blessed in Caerphilly because we have fantastic people working across schools and settings, trying to do their very best to improve, attendance levels. Sometimes they have huge success, sometimes they may not be quite there yet, but everybody is very kind of committed, whether it's head teachers or support staff or governors. I think coming back to that idea around stakeholder kind of engagement, it's really important that we've got that collective way forward. Okay, so going on to the first slide, talking about our principles as a local authority. We're a big authority. We've got 85 schools. We had our inspection recently in the summer term, and attendance was, as you would expect, was a big focus. And we had, lovely feedback from Estyn, recognizing that we're not there where we want to be, but our strategy for moving forward is clear. We are, at the time of inspection, we got 22.5% of free school meal pupils, recognizing that it is, there's large pockets of deprivation in Caerphilly. So a lot of our work has been focused specifically at this group of pupils. And again, we've been really been very, very happy with our results, because we are seeing the gap between FSM and non-FSM closing over time. But in terms of our approach, first of all, and Jamie's going to talk about this in more depth in a moment, it's about how we are encouraging schools to evaluate, to build capacity and develop expertise in-house. So I think, and I was very naive following COVID, I thought children would just automatically come back to school. Well, I was wrong, wasn't I? But so it's about, looking at in terms of the processes and systems that take place within a school, and encouraging all schools to have a fresh look at what goes on, because some things will be having more impact than others. And our message very much to schools is, if that's not working, stop doing it. But this bit is working really well, so let's see how we can develop that a bit more. But it's very much about kind of developing evaluation. I mentioned as well about the participation of all stakeholders. And it's not just schools, is it? It's everybody needs to understand that vision to getting pupils back into school. As I said, we've got people working in schools doing an amazing job, supported by external services such as LA officers, youth services, other partners, all really working hard. Counsellors, governing bodies, parents. Parents are so key, and that is challenging sometimes, because a minority of parents will sometimes put things online that can be quite. You need that resilience, don't you, to really manage. So it's working with sometimes the trickiest of parents to really get them get the children back into school, but it can be a challenge. We feel very strongly it's about being positive in our approach. We feel that when you build good relationships with people and there are high levels of trust, you will get the best out of people. That doesn't mean being blind to the challenges ahead and not recognizing the barriers and the obstacles, and not being honest with people. But it is about, we feel that if we demonstrate empathy and we recognize the amount of work going on in schools, it builds confidence and it builds resilience. So being positive, having a kind of, a positive approach to attendance really helps. Following that, innovation. So, I talked about naively thinking things would just return to normal post-pandemic. What we didn't realize is that we have to utilize the best practice that was always there, such as scrutiny of data, first aid response calling, all those really good practice going on. But also it's making sure that there has to be new ways and inventive ways in which we're going to need to think of and develop within our own schools. And that's why a day like this is so important and really helpful, because we will hopefully learn from each other to hear, the different bits of best practice that's going on in other settings. As our approach, we also recognise that resources can be limited, and it would be naive of me to say to every school, well, you all need a family liaison officer because that will solve all your problems. The reality is, with financial constraints on schools at the moment, resources are limited, and you can only do in terms of, what your budget allows you to do. But linked to that, it's making sure that there are, any additional funding that comes in to the authority and to schools is used in the most creative way to maximize impact. We heard earlier about the use of community focused schools money. That linked alongside the attendance mission can have a really powerful impact. So there are things that can be done. And the last bit of our approach as a local authority is recognizing that there are other pressures. Yes, attendance is in my world and everyone's world, attendance is the number one strategy Yeah, the number one important thing, get the pupils into school. But it would be naive to think that is the only pressure on schools at the moment. Curriculum for Wales implementation, the ALN Act, and associated kind of increased challenges post-pandemic around well-being and behaviour, and other pressures within a local context. They all have to be kind of, we've got to take everything into account when looking at what our strategy would be like. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of our strategy, and the next slide as well, please. Apologies. So in terms of our strategy, it's developed over time. It wasn't an overnight thing. It's been a lot of tears, a lot of reflection, a lot of thinking, but we've kept it as simple as we can, because if things sometimes are simpler, it's easier to communicate, and it's a better way then of bringing all stakeholders on board. So our first one is self-evaluation, which Jamie will speak about in a second. But alongside that, what have we done differently? Well, pre-pandemic, we'd send out the data, the attendance data once a term. Post-pandemic, we send out the attendance data for all schools every month. And in that, we now rank all schools in Caerphilly by FSM profile. So you can see, so if you're a head teacher or somebody working in a school, you can look at a school nearby, which has got a similar FSM profile, and see where they are breaking through in attendance. Because we've currently got about 25% of our schools in Caerphilly are now above pre-pandemic levels. So wherever they are, and that depends, that's not just about the least deprived, that's across the spectrum. So you can see, so when that data is presented on a monthly basis, schools can see, well, actually, I know a school down the road, similar FSM profile, and they are making a difference. I can go and see what that school is doing. And again, sometimes when we present data, there can be some suspicion around that it's in a punitive way, but absolutely not, because when you've got positive relationships with levels of trust, people are happy to share data and will use it as an appropriate tool for improvement. Okay, so the second real focus for our strategy is our wider professional learning offer to schools. And what are we doing different to pre-pandemic? Well, as an example, we used to have all stakeholders together and we would have one workshop per term. We've now separated that out to separate stakeholder groups. So for example, school clerks, family liaison officers, they will have their own workshop, and it will be based on things such as best practice, day-to-day, operational management of attendance, such as first calling, management of data. We've done things such as having difficult conversations with parents when you ring them up, and a parent could be very challenging down the phone. With head teachers, they get their own attendance session now, and we talk on a more strategic level. So, for example, we recently looked at the ESTIN thematic review on secondary attendance. We did it with all head teachers because we thought it was just a really good document to enable discussion, have that empathy, have that peer-to-peer discussion, and think about ways forward as well. And then the final area within our attendance strategy is about support for individuals and groups of learners. And one of the examples we've given here is we have something in Caerphilly called Team Around the School. And that's where a school might be a bit stuck on its attendance. So we say, right, okay, head teacher, bring who you need. Let's have a meeting. I'll make sure the relevant local authority officers are there as well. And we problem solve everything that we think could be challenging, to that school. What are the barriers? And we each take responsibility, collectively in terms of what we need to do to support that school. Okay, we've put some other things, some ideas in terms of what we've done there, but our overarching strategy is linked to those three areas. And as I said, simpler sometimes is easier to communicate. So I'm going to pass to Jamie now, who's going to talk in more depth about the supported self-evaluation activity.
Thank you, Paul. Charlotte, can you put the next slide on, please? Okay, so as Paul said, I'm Jamie Deggan, and I've been working alongside my colleague Andrew Lloyd to support schools around their self-evaluation regarding attendance, but also going into schools to do an in-depth attendance review. Andrew is an ex-primary head, so he's been working with primary schools predominantly, where he goes into the schools, looks at their self-evaluation processes, and also uses that opportunity to share good practice. I'm an ex-pastoral lead in a secondary school, so I've been working with the secondary schools where I go into the schools to do a 1 to 2 day in-depth review of their attendance processes. Now, this review was never meant to be punitive. It's a completely supportive process. It's working with the school. And it became a process where schools were actually requesting the review. You know, they really valued the input that was coming from our colleagues, and they actually requested it at the end. So during the review, the first thing I would do is meet with the SLT to scrutinise any policies and their tracking systems. I would then have follow-up discussions with all the staff involved with attendance, so middle leaders, support staff, classroom teachers, and if possible, a link governor. And the purpose of that was just to make sure that the policies are being consistently applied at all levels. I'd also carry out a pupil voice activity, which you can imagine was very interesting. And during that pupil voice activity, I would ask the pupils their barriers to attendance, the reasons why they felt pupils weren't attending school more regularly now, post-pandemic, and also trying to find out what they thought schools could do a little bit better in encouraging them coming to school. Following the evaluation, I'd produce a report for the school, and it would just go to the school and it'd highlight areas of their strength and particular areas they needed to develop. And then moving forward, I intend to go into schools to review their progress, really, to see what the impact of the evaluation was. Charlotte, can you go on to the next slide, please? So what I thought I'd share with you in this slide is just some of the common themes that I picked up during these evaluations and these reviews. So the first one is around forensic tracking and analysis of data. Now, all schools are tracking data very well, but there was some variation in the type of work they're doing around the analysis of that data and how they use that data. So the most effective schools were using the data to identify trends, but not only that, tracking the impact of the interventions they're implementing. So that was very clear where the best schools would get the most impact. The second theme was lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities. Now, I just want to make it clear that all schools I worked with were working incredibly hard around attendance, and some schools were throwing everything through at attendance. But I felt in some cases there was some duplication of work between staff, that some staff were not quite clear on their roles and responsibilities in the bigger picture in improving attendance. And also, a lot of the staff, as we know, that deal with attendance are pastoral staff. So they've got the added pressures of dealing with behaviour issues and other challenges like safeguarding, which often took them away from their primary attendance role. And that obviously impacted then on their capacity to support the children during interventions. The most successful schools I found were developing a culture of improving attendance. So everybody was involved in that process. So it wasn't just one or two members of staff responsible for attendance, but everybody within the school workforce, from a classroom teacher all the way up to SLT.
Okay, so that's the end of our presentation. Thanks so much for listening. I think the key messages from us are it's about high levels of trust between stakeholders can really support the collective mission. And it is important to celebrate the positive as it happens. So, you know, when you start to see those kind of improvements, you know, make sure that that is something that you do celebrate, because, you know, we know it's got to get better. We know no one is satisfied, but, you know, it's understanding kind of the journey that you're on is really helpful. And when you have high levels of trust between people, that allows a sharing of expertise, and it also allows accountability as well, because no one feels threatened, because everyone's joining in kind of on the shared mission. But our kind of a self-evaluation journey has been absolutely critical to seeing the improving success. So thank you for listening.